That night, everything seemed normal. Her son-in-law had just dropped her off at home. Nothing felt out of place. No signs of danger, no reason to believe that this would be the last time anyone saw her. It was quiet, routine, safe. But by morning, something wasn't right. She wasn't answering her phone. She wasn't where she was supposed to be. At first, it felt like a delay, something small, until investigators checked the doorbell camera, and that's when everything changed, because there, in the darkness, was someone no one expected. A man wearing a mask. And in that moment, the quiet of that night turned into something else entirely. Because by morning, Nancy Guthrie was gone. The disappearance of Nancy Guthrie was shocking because she wasn't someone anyone would ever expect to simply vanish. She was a mother, a constant presence in her family's life. Someone who kept her routines, stayed connected, and never missed a call or a visit. The kind of person whose absence is felt immediately and deeply. That's what makes this case so unsettling. Because this isn't just about a woman going missing. It's about what was left behind. A quiet home, unanswered calls, and signs that something had gone terribly wrong. This isn't just a disappearance. Something about this case doesn't add up. Nancy Ellen Long Guthrie was born on January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She moved to the Tucson area in the early 1970s with her family and had lived there for over 5 decades. She married Charles Guthrie, who tragically passed away at age 49 during a mining exploration trip in Mexico in 1988. Together, they had 3 children, Savannah, Annie, and Camron. Even at 84, Nancy remained sharp, independent, and deeply involved in her community. She lived alone in her home in the Catalina foothills, carefully maintaining her daily routines despite having limited mobility and needing medication for a chronic condition. She was a woman of consistency, a person her family could rely on without question. Every day had its rhythm. Her morning coffee, her phone calls to her children, her attentive care for her grandchildren, and her dedication to attending church. Church wasn't just a routine for Nancy. It was a cornerstone of her life. She was a familiar face in her congregation, someone who offered warmth and guidance, always present for Sunday services and community gatherings. She had never missed a scheduled church event, which made the events of that night all the more alarming. Nancy was predictable, and that's why what happened next makes no sense. That night, she failed to appear for her scheduled church service. Her family's worry began immediately, and by morning, the absence of her familiar calls and presence was impossible to ignore. The reliability, the routine, the comforting predictability of Nancy Guthrie, all of it vanished, leaving a void that was impossible to fill. To understand the gravity of her disappearance, it's important to see Nancy not just as a missing person, but as the center of a family, a community, and a life built on care, consistency, and connection. The night of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance began like any other. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, who is married to her daughter Annie, had just dropped her off at her home in the Catalina foothills. He helped her inside, ensured she was settled, and said goodnight, as he had countless times before. Nancy followed her usual routine, locking the doors, adjusting the thermostat, and settling into her favorite chair with a book. Outside, the quiet streets were still, the neighborhood calm under the Tucson night sky. She carefully prepared her medications for the evening and set out everything she would need for the next day. Her home reflected order, care, and familiarity, the kind of place where nothing seemed out of place and every corner bore the mark of a life meticulously tended. For her family, nothing about that evening suggested danger. Annie, Savannah, and Camron assumed she was safe and ready for her Sunday morning church service, a routine she had never missed in decades. The predictability of Nancy's habits offered comfort and security, a sense that all was as it should be. And yet, beneath the calm surface, something had shifted. A presence unseen, a disturbance unnoticed, something that would soon unravel the predictability of her life. The small, familiar details of that night, The locked doors, the quiet street, the gentle hum of Tucson in the dark would become pieces of a puzzle that no one could have imagined. At the time, nothing seemed wrong. It was ordinary. It was routine. But by the next morning, everything had changed. Nancy Guthrie had vanished. By late morning, the worry that had been quietly growing, and it could no longer be ignored. Annie, Savannah, and Camron knew they had to see for themselves that she was safe. Tommaso Cioni, her son-in-law, and Annie's husband joined them as they approached her home in the Catalina foothills, hearts heavy with dread. The front door, usually secure and welcoming, seemed slightly ajar. At first, they thought it might be a simple oversight. Perhaps Nancy had forgotten to lock it. But as they stepped inside, an eerie stillness filled the air. Small signs of disruption became immediately apparent. A chair slightly out of place. Belongings not exactly where she would have left them. This was the moment everything changed for them. The house that had always represented safety and comfort now felt alien, almost threatening in its silence. The routines they had relied upon, knowing she would be in her chair, seeing her at breakfast, hearing her familiar voice, were shattered. This wasn't a simple oversight or a brief delay. Something had happened. Something that had taken their mother from them without explanation. And as the magnitude of her absence settled in, the family knew that their lives and their sense of security would never be the same. As investigators arrived at Nancy Guthrie's home, the unease that had already gripped the family only intensified. Officers moved carefully through the house, noting the subtle but unsettling details. A chair slightly out of place, personal items not exactly where Nancy would have left them, and small signs that suggested someone had been inside. It was these quiet discrepancies, rather than any overt violence, that made the scene so disturbing. Then came the doorbell camera footage. What they saw was brief, but it sent shockwaves through everyone who watched it. A man, wearing a mask, had approached the house during the night. He lingered, moved with purpose, and vanished just as quickly. There were no signs of forced entry, no other disturbances, only that shadowed figure in the dark, captured in grainy pixels that would haunt the family for days. For Nancy's children, the images were devastating. This wasn't a case of forgetfulness or miscommunication. There was a presence, unknown, menacing, and unseen, that had entered their mother's world. The predictable rhythms of her life had been interrupted in a way that no one could explain. Every detail the investigators uncovered deepened the sense of mystery. No obvious motive, no clear path, and no immediate leads. The family watched helplessly as professionals pieced together the fragments, each one raising more questions than it answered. This was more than a disappearance. It was a puzzle that refused to yield its secrets. And for the Guthrie family, the images and evidence from that night became a permanent reminder of the fear, uncertainty, and helplessness that had begun the moment Nancy vanished. Once Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, law enforcement quickly mobilized. Local police worked alongside the FBI, treating her case as a potential abduction rather than a routine missing person report. Officers canvassed the quiet streets of the Catalina foothills, knocking on doors, interviewing neighbors, and reviewing every scrap of surveillance footage in the area. They searched nearby parks, winding streets, and secluded spots where someone could have gone unnoticed. Detectives followed every plausible lead, even bringing in people for questioning. Neighbors, delivery drivers, anyone whose movements that night might have intersected with Nancy's. They compiled timelines, checked cell phone records, and examined her bank activity for anything out of the ordinary. But, with each person interviewed and each search conducted, the results were frustratingly repetitive. No confirmed sightings, no credible tips, no breakthrough. Investigators scoured the surrounding desert terrain with K-9 units and search teams, yet found no trace of Nancy's presence outside her home. Despite sophisticated technology and experienced personnel on the ground, the case refused to yield clear answers. For the Guthrie family, the official activity should have brought hope. But instead, it deepened their unease. Every press release and update seemed to raise more questions than it answered. Why was there no sign of forced entry? Why had the masked figure on camera never been identified? And after all the interviews and searches, why were the investigators still no closer to understanding what happened? For every answer provided by law enforcement, more questions appeared. Every lead branched into new uncertainty, and every expert assessment circled back to the same frustrating reality. The truth remained out of reach, leaving the family and the community with a haunting void that no investigation could yet fill. Nancy Guthrie's disappearance remains one of the most unsettling mysteries in the Catalina foothills. Decades of routines, a life built on care and consistency, vanished in a single night, leaving a family forever changed and a community searching for answers. Her children, Savannah, Annie, and Camron, live with the weight of uncertainty every day. They have paused their lives, offered rewards, and worked tirelessly to uncover any clue that might lead to her safe return. Their hope has not wavered, even as questions continue to outnumber answers. If you have any information, no matter how small it may seem, come forward. Every tip matters. Help bring clarity to a family who has been living in the shadow of doubt and fear for far too long. Somewhere out there, someone knows the truth. Months have passed since Nancy Guthrie disappeared, yet the void she left behind is felt every single day. Her children, Savannah, Annie, and Camron, navigate a life forever altered. Every routine they once shared with her, every call, every visit, now carries the weight of uncertainty. What should have been comforting memories are now sharp reminders of the person they can no longer see or hear. Savannah, in particular, has put her work on hold, devoting herself fully to the search for her mother. Every day is consumed with following leads, checking with authorities, and spreading awareness about Nancy's disappearance. The family has also taken the extraordinary step of offering a reward for information, hoping that someone somewhere might hold the key to finding her.